A lot of people think that addiction is caused by a lack of willpower or that they just don't really want to stop doing the addictive behavior. However, the truth is that addiction changes the brain in very real and predictable ways. And those changes make it incredibly difficult for the person who's addicted to stop doing that behavior, no matter how much they want to. And sometimes, if we understand those changes, it can make it easier for us to approach addiction through the lens of compassion instead of judgment. Hi, my name is Mitch Schutte. I'm a person in long-term recovery. I'm a therapist, and I'm a licensed alcohol drug counselor. And on this channel, we learn about psychological tools and concepts that can help us live a better life. So let's go see what psychology can teach us about living better. All right, so a lot of addiction comes down to the molecule dopamine. And if you haven't heard of dopamine right now, you're probably living under a rock. And so a lot of people make the mistake and think that dopamine is the molecule of pleasure, when dopamine is actually more like the molecule of motivation, learning, and assigning value to things. And so basically what that means is dopamine's job is to get us to keep doing the things that our brain thinks is going to keep us alive. Evolutionary psychologists look at humans like 10,000 years ago, and they say, all right, well, if this person came across, let's just say, like a bush full of berries, right, that are really nutrient dense. Well, the body and the brain need to know that these things are really important. So how do we do that? Well, typically what happens is when we come across something that's going to keep us alive, it's going to jack up that molecule dopamine. And so activities like finding nutrient-rich foods or sex or bonding with other people can all release dopamine in our system and make us want to keep doing that thing before. It also helps us remember the stages that lead up to that so that we don't forget how we got there in the first place. And so dopamine is great. Dopamine has been keeping us alive for years and is really one of the biggest responsible things for keeping humans around for so long. However, the dopamine system can be hijacked, and people who produce substances and people who produce social media and marketers all are aware of how powerful and strong dopamine can be. So when we're looking at how dopamine gets released when a person is using substances, it's massive, right? So when someone takes a drink of alcohol or meth or cocaine, we could see anywhere from a 10 to 1,000 time increase in the person's dopamine levels compared to them just having sex. Think about that for a second, right? The most dopamine dense thing that we can do as humans is have sex so that we reproduce. And now substances and other things have hijacked the system that give us a stronger reward than having sex itself. Now, people realize that they go out and they try and find mates all the time and put a lot of effort into doing that. And so it makes sense why someone whose dopamine system's been hijacked by substances is going to continue to want to do that, right? If I'm getting that big of a return and feels that good to use it, then I may pursue that thing. And in an episode we'll discuss later, a lot of people have a genetic predisposition to want to use substances in the first place. And their reward system actually is more responsive to substances than yours is. And so one of the issues is that when someone starts using those substances enough, their brain actually changes in a way that makes it more likely for them to continue using substances. So what happens if someone keeps using those substances for a long period of time? Their dopamine level, which let's say sits right here, gets these huge spikes when they use the substance itself and jacks it all the way up to here. Let's go that far, right? And so the brain doesn't like this distance right here. This is not good for it. And it says, okay, well, how do we stop having these massive spikes in dopamine so that we can stay a little bit more regulated? Well, it actually down regulates the dopamine system, which is going to decrease this gap so that your body doesn't have this massive response and things don't change too much when you use the substance itself. Now, the issue is that when your brain makes that adaptation to start responding more to substances and make that gap less, it actually makes you feel less pleasure when you're not using the substance itself. And so instead of having that massive spike, it decreases how good you feel by using the substances, but relatively everything else also feels less useful than the substances themselves. And so what ends up happening is things that you used to enjoy a lot end up not having that same dopamine spike as the substances do, and they don't feel as good. If you've talked to anyone in addiction, they may talk about just like this lack of pleasure, or lack of motivation, lack of drive, things don't feel quite as good, everything's kind of gray. That's kind of a symptom of depression. That's also kind of a symptom of long-term addiction. And basically at that point, they're not just using the substances to feel good. Now we're just using the substances to feel anything or to stop feeling bad. And another issue is that people who use substances are often using it to dull pain or escape reality. So someone already doesn't feel good, they're using substances to try and feel better. That solution may have worked temporarily, like we've talked about in a previous video. However, in the long term, that's not going to work out. And so this person uses the substances to try and feel good, but they don't really change anything else in their life. And so now, not only do they not feel good when they're doing things that aren't the substance itself, but their life is not in a better spot because they haven't done the things they need to do to make their life better. And they don't have that dopamine system motivating them to keep moving forwards. And so they have a really hijacked reward system, which is why someone can say completely sincerely, I will never use substances again. I will never do that behavior again, and mean it in the moment. However, when they start to be around the substances or they feel really, really bad, the brain has associated so many positive things with using it that their thinking brain turns off. And there's science to show that the prefrontal cortex doesn't even turn on as much. And so these people are really in their lizard brain, survival brain, and the substances or the behavior equals survival to them, which is why they do it. So the good news is that this can be changed over time, but it requires us to reset our dopamine system. Now, one of the reasons that residential treatment is anywhere from around 28 days long is because that's kind of the length of time that your brain needs to try and get back to baseline. And a lot of times it's going to take longer than that for it to fully reset. But you have to get the substance or the behavior out of your system so that your brain can start responding normally. And then your brain will adapt and it'll use that neuroplasticity that it has to fix itself over time. It's an incredibly resilient organ. However, we need to let it do its job without interfering. And so the good news is, if someone seeks help, goes to treatment, and gets sober for a period of time, those things will reset. The difficulty is talking to someone early in recovery can be really difficult because they're trying to change everything and they don't feel good 2 to 3 weeks down the road, or even a couple months down, they hit one of those lulls in their brain healing and things don't quite feel as well. It's good. And so what we want to try and do is get them sober for long enough and then do some other things that are going to release dopamine in that period of time that are going to make them feel good so that they feel good and their life is better at the same time. So we don't just want them to remove the substances and do things that are going to make them feel good. And eventually their brain will reset, they'll come back to normal, and they'll be another functioning member of society, and they won't have to break their promises and things like that. So, well, thank you. I appreciate you staying through the end of this video. If you've liked the information at all, consider subscribing to the channel. I'll talk to you next time. Thanks.